7.3 The Aeon or Dominant of Prometheaion. If there is a trickster here from the future, a shape-shifting superorganism attempting to catalyze our further evolution beyond the parameters defined by the Nordics, then what is its modus operandi and ultimate purpose? In what way can we creatively redefine our relationship with this thing so that it is more constructive? Referring to it as the thing, has not merely been a stylistic flourish intended to evoke the monsters of the cosmic horror or body horror genres of science fiction cinema. Rather, it has been an underhanded reference to Immanuel Kant's distinction between the thing in itself and phenomena, about which I have written extensively elsewhere. Charles Fort has something to say about this too, although without any explicit reference to Kant, but very much to the detriment of Kant and of all rationalism. The Damned, from the title of Fort's 1919 book of the Damned, refers to phenomena marginalized by the dominant discourse of a certain era. Not only the epoch's constellation of established scientific theories, but also the frameworks of the era's religious belief system. For example, in the Age of Enlightenment, thinkers such as Kant wrote treatises that attempted to define religion within the limits of reason alone. The damned data, are what has to be marginalized if not excluded as altogether impossible in order to shore up the structure of what is considered possible and what is defined as real in any epoch. What phenomena define the limits of the possible in one era are pushed into the fringe in another era and vice versa, such that which is commonly called being is a state that is wrought more or less definitely proportionately to the appearance of positive difference between that which is included and that which is excluded. The argument over what or who ought to be damned, only ever appears to be a rational debate. Really, it is more like rival missionaries, scientists, arguing over the religious conversion of natives, laymen. Every conversation is a conflict of missionaries, each trying to convert the other, to assimilate, or to make the other similar to himself. Thus far, one might imagine that what Fort is saying is a precursor to Thomas Kuhn's theory of paradigm shifts, in his structure of scientific revolutions. In that classic text in the field of philosophy of science, Kuhn argues that explicit scientific theories are defined within the context of an implicit framework that is subject to epochal changes, which are comparable to political revolutions and which reveal knowledge as inextricable from power relations. However, that is not the case. Although Kuhn does claim that there are no extra paradigmatic standards that mediate or educate in the revolutionary shift between paradigms, he still thinks that there is an objective reality that exists beyond the ways that we attempt to acquire knowledge of it through our various scientific paradigms. In other words, he basically accepts Kant's distinction between phenomena as known through the structure of any paradigm and the thing that will always remain unknowable in itself. Not so with Charles Fort, whose existential contemplations of the damned, present us with the presentiments of the kind of philosophy of science that would be developed by Paul Feyerabend in the 1970s. For a full treatment of the differences between Kuhn and Feyerabend, see my discussion of their respective views on the relationship between knowledge and power in Prometheus and Atlas. For our purposes here, the bottom line is this. Feyerabend rejects the very idea of objective reality altogether and claims that when our power structures redefine what is scientifically acceptable as reality, that which objectively is, transforms accordingly, not just our putatively subjective perception of it. The subjective, is itself a construct of structures of knowledge that are defined by power relations. Feyerabend even timidly engaged with a bit of evidence for the paranormal when he advanced this argument, but Fort was there first, with encyclopedic reams of data backing this bold claim. What Kuhn and Feyerabend would later call paradigms, Fort refers to as dominants, These are religious and scientific structures, belief systems that succeed one another, defining the nature of reality and the law-like behavior of the cosmos in one or another epoch, such that the solemnest of our existence's phenomena are of a wobbling tissue, rocks of ages that are only hardened muds, or that a lie is the heart of everything sacred, because otherwise there could not be growth, or development, or evolution. Firm beliefs held by those suffering from delusions such as the primordial tradition or perennial wisdom are an impediment to evolutionary development. Such beliefs, for example, the Vedantic idea of God as Brahman and the relationship of a permanent inner self, the microcosm of Atman, to the macrocosm of the cosmic consciousness, function, to produce an intense mental state, referred to in meditational yoga as a dharana that yields samadhi, which is impossible unless there be something or the illusion of something to center upon. This is a conundrum, because if one admits to oneself that such ideas and the states of mind that they produce are only functional, then the illusion is broken and God, ceases to work. Fourth solution to this is to conceive of the magic of blasphemies. Why not focus on the devil and just admit that religion is witchcraft? That was essentially John Keel's conclusion in Operation Trojan Horse. Keel came to believe that ufology is basically demonology. Neither did he mean this disparagingly, nor was he making this observation from the standpoint of a kind of religious convictions held by the Collins elite. On the contrary, had he been aware of the Collins elite, and there can be no doubt that they were aware of him, Keel would have seen them as pathetic victims of the diabolical machinations that he thought were responsible for engineering all of the noteworthy human religious belief systems through staged events of the type we now call closed encounters, and revelations of the kind that are now framed as contactee messages, Keel's theory was that UFOs are a form of electromagnetic energy at the upper end of the super spectrum, that is mostly imperceptible to humans, and that they lower their frequency in order to manifest in a way that we can perceive. He distinguished hard, UFOs from soft ones, with the former being various illusionary craft that are manifested like camouflage in order to conceal the true nature of the entities in their more amorphously energetic soft form. The intelligence that directs these manifestations and determines their transmogrification is paraphysical, in its nature and capabilities, comparable to ghosts or poltergeists, but on a cosmic, scale. UFOs and various trickster-type phenomena involved in close encounters are like Trojan horses, of this cosmic joker, deceptive paraphysical objects that disguise the thing's true nature so that it can manipulate us for purposes ultimately known only to itself. For us to let in, this thing once had to assume the form of angels. Now aliens have more authority. It is only the limits of the human mind, with its dualistic framing of things, that wants to see demons or bad aliens as a class of beings set against angels or putatively benevolent space brothers, Really, it is all just the devil, including God. The devil, in the sense that what is behind the Wizard of Oz's curtain is not a benevolent deity or divine creator with a higher morality, interested in the salvation of the human soul or punishment of the wicked. The wizard is a trickster, as shamanic tribal cultures understood the trickster. The God, of any or every revealed religion is just one of his diabolical projections. Keel was not the first person to think along these paraphysical lines about UFOs or to consider close encounters in the context of the trickster. That would be Carl Jung. In his book Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies, with reference to the studies of Major Donald Kehoe, Edward Ruppelt, and Professor Howard Menzel, Jung admits that there is overwhelming evidence for the empirical reality of UFOs. Although Jung's book does not reach any definitive conclusion about what UFOs are, and despite the fact that he ultimately remains in a state of ambiguity regarding the answer to that question, Jung does consider one alternative to the extraterrestrial hypothesis that is most intriguing. With his extensive familiarity with research in parapsychology, Jung suggests that UFOs might be psychic projections rather than solid objects. Instead of being a display of anti-gravity technology, he wonders whether the apparent weightlessness and insect-like extraordinary flight characteristics of the UFOs are indications of their psychic nature. What bothers Jung about this is that, since they also register on radar screens, these projections would have to be psychokinetic or telekinetic, as they used to say, rather than just telepathic. Jung admits that there are mediums who can even produce simulacra of objects using psychokinesis, but he balks at the idea that UFOs and their occupants could be something akin to this. He does consider the possibility, though. The alternative hypothesis that UFOs are something psychic that is endowed with certain physical properties seems even less probable. For where should such a thing come from? If weightlessness is a hard proposition to swallow, then the notion of a materialized psychism opens a bottomless void under our feet. Parapsychology is, of course, acquainted with the fact of materialization, but this phenomenon depends on the presence of one or more mediums who exude a weightable substance, and it occurs only in their immediate vicinity. The psyche can move the body, but only inside the living organism. There's something psychic, possessing material qualities, and with a high charge of energy, could appear by itself high in the air at a great distance from any human mediums. This surpasses our comprehension. Here our knowledge leaves us completely in the lurch, and it is therefore pointless to speculate any further in this direction. Really? It is pointless to pursue this line of thought? No. The problem is that Jung does not consider the possibility that the medium producing these materializations may be non-human and evolutionarily endowed with psychic abilities far greater than those of humans. He asks, where should such a thing come from? Well, sir, maybe from the 95% of the 70% of this planet that remains completely unexplored by humans. It is all around us, under us, everywhere, and able to project itself above us and into us. The problem with Jung's whole approach to psychic phenomena is that he takes ESP and PK, of the kind that was being studied in the laboratory by parapsychologists such as J.V. Ryan during his lifetime, to be expressions of what he calls synchronicity, and defines as a causal connecting principle, undergoes. Elsewhere, I have drawn upon the work of Stephen E. Broad, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and past President of Parapsychological Association, in order to level a scathing analytical critique of this totally incoherent Jungian concept. The upshot of this critique is that for there to be something like synchronicity, undergoes, or a nexus of extremely complex and meaningful coordinated events that defy mere coincidence, there does need to be a causal connection between these events. Jung is too limited in his conception of causality when he defines synchronicity as a causal, undergoes. A more sophisticated concept of causality, reaching back to the formal and teleological causes of antiquity, could offer an explanation of synchronicities in terms of mind-boggling convergence of various acts of super psi, both ESP and PK, in order to produce the awe-inspiring, meaningful coincidences, undergoes. Attempting to explain, he does nothing of the sort, ESP and PK in terms of a causal synchronicity, undergoes, is backwards. ESP and PK are the causal mechanism of highly complex phenomena that Jung, at a loss, called synchronicities. This is all relevant here insofar as Jung saw synchronicity, undergoes, as an expression of the trickster, just as he also saw the trickster at work in the psychic phenomenology of close encounters. The trickster is a mercurial shape-shifter, a demonic being known for his fondness for sly jokes and malicious pranks. Jung explicitly connects this mischievous behavior with poltergeists and other phenomena studied by parapsychologists, who usually do not have an appreciation for the psychology of the trickster. Jinxes and various other bewitched happenings, often of an at least vaguely menacing character, are expressions of this trickster, which Jung in turn defines as the collective analog of the personal shadow, undergoes. Just as we each have a shadow side to our psyche that contains unconsciously repressed contents, which find their ways to the surface in behavior that is beyond our conscious control, and often at odds with the personality that we want to present, our society as a whole has something like a shadow on the level of the collective unconscious. The trickster in one of the archetypes operating from out of the collective unconscious, and according to Jung, it is the only one that rebels against the repression of an overtly rule-governed, civilized pattern of life. The personal shadows of individuals in society become channels for the collective emergence of the trickster in situations like this. In our contemporary global society, unlike in that of the biblical antiquity, the form of ruled government repression is not a theocratic state, but a technocracy or scientific dictatorship that controls people's lives and their ways of thinking at a level much higher than that of their putatively representative governments. Consequently, in this materialistic age dominated by the power of technology, the trickster must manifest in a technological form. That is where the connection to the close encounters comes in. Jung claims that the trickster is always an expression of barbaric or archaic unconsciousness revolting against the increasing consciousness of civilized life, and he suggests that somehow, if we were to achieve full consciousness, not just individually but societally, we would be free from the evil, undergoes qualities of this disruptive force. Jung does not seem to realize that his own suggestion that the UFO phenomenon is a manifestation of the trickster problematizes this postulation. Jung can only think that perhaps the collective unconscious is producing close encounters with UFOs and their occupants in order to overpower the materialistic mindset and will to instrumental control of modern man. so as to bring back to nature in some romantically primitive and naively ecological sense. Despite the fact that one of his own disciples, the psychologist Carl Kereny, wrote an entire Jungian archetypal analysis of Prometheus, it is lost on Jung that there is at least one image of the trickster, one mask of the trickster, that is a radical counterexample to this general characterization of this archetype. Prometheus is a consciousness-raising civilizer. That is the nature of his rebellion, not a revolt of the unconscious against civilization. What if the technological manifestation of the trickster in the form of close encounters is a gift-giving Promethean modality of this archetype? Here the reader must be reminded that we're not talking about the Nordic breakaway civilization, but about some other thing that is producing certain aspects of the phenomena associated with the UFOs that cannot be adequately explained by the theory that humans have invented flying time machines. Jung makes one remark that is relevant to the connection between these Nordic time travelers and the trickster. It is in his critique of the traditionalist mindset of believers in the Sophia Perennis, who in a more striking idealization of the past, of course, than anyone else, praise the bygone not merely as the good old days, the way that mere conservatives do, but as the golden age. Jung notes that this is not just by uneducated and superstitious people, but by all those legions of theosophical enthusiasts who resolutely believe in the former existence and lofty civilization of Atlantis. Jung adds, anyone who belongs to a sphere of culture that seeks the perfect state somewhere in the past must feel very queerly indeed when controlled by the figure of the trickster. Indeed, undoubtedly, but not for the reasons that Jung thinks. He does not understand the so-called myth of Atlantis. First of all, as has been argued in Chapter 5, Atlantis, although it may not have been called that, is a dimly recollected historical reality, not a myth. Jung is confusing, as he puts it, theosophical ideas about Atlantis with what Plato actually tells us. To be fair to theosophy and anthroposophy, his characterization here does not even apply to what Helena Blavatsky or Rudolf Steiner wrote about Atlantis, but only to certain naively traditionalist theosophists, perhaps those that Jung was most familiar with in a Germanic context, who looked back to Atlantis or Thule as if it were some Hyperborean utopia and cradle of the Aryan master race. This was, of course, the view of the Thule Society and the SS. As we saw in Chapter 5, and as was elaborated on above in the first section of this chapter, both Plato's account of Atlantis and the archaeological and anthropological evidence for such a civilization suggests that at least some significant segment of its citizenry eventually came to consider it a dystopia and not a utopia. It is at this point when the Atlanteans, rebel against the gods, who founded the civilization, that Atlantis really becomes Atlantis, and not just a colonial base for the tyrannical rule of these gods over slave races of subhumans that they spawned on the earth. But where Jung's confused intuition hits on the truth is that this rebellion had everything to do with the archetypal force of the trickster. Consider that you are in Atlantis, a maritime civilization based on the island continent of Antarctica, ruling the earth through navies with submarines in the oceans. And when you look above you at the stars, you do not see an outer space that is a frontier of exploration, but instead you see the stars as holes in the black dome of a prison that is meant to keep you bound. A prison set up by gods who want to keep you chained to the past, as if the form of society they have achieved is perfection. A prison vigilantly guarded by wardens who stare down from the watchtower of the moon. Where would your maritime civilization look for freedom if such was your conception of the world? You would have to look downward instead of upward, into the unfathomable depth of the oceans and the inner space that is the human psyche. In her study of the Cthulhu mythos of H.P. Lovecraft, Tracy Tywin makes a compelling case that Lovecraft was really writing about Atlantis and the Atlanteans. She argues that the name Cthulhu is derived from Thule, that cyclopean megalithic city of Reja in Antarctica is really Atlantis, and that the great old ones, trapped beneath the ice and awaiting future liberation by the deeply esoteric cult that has remained faithful to them, are actually Atlantean kings. Time Man was definitely onto something, but what she missed is that Cthulhu and the great old ones are not those who came from space to found Atlantis, namely the gods who ruled Eden and who set up the caste system. Rather, Cthulhu is a monstrous being that was summoned from out of the depths by Atlantean rebels against the guardians of the celestial holy order. That interpretation fits much better with passages such as this one, from the Call of the Cthulhu, which Steinman cites in her study as a description of the character of the Old Ones. The cold would never die till the stars came right again, and the secret priest would take great Cthulhu from his tomb to revive his subjects and resume his rule on earth. The time would be easy to know, for then mankind would have become as the great Old Ones, free and wild and beyond good and evil, with laws and morals thrown aside, and all men shouting and killing and reveling in joy. Then the liberated Old Ones would teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all the earth would flame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom. Cthulhu was a totem, a standard, the symbol of the banner of rebellion. For those Atlanteans who rose up against the Olympian order, imagine something like the black Kraken emblazoned banner of the Ironborn in Game of Thrones. What Time gets right is that Cthulhu is one and the same as the beast of the apocalypse, the biblical Leviathan, who dwells in the depths of the greatest enemy of a tyrannical god who only claims to be almighty, but whose despotic reign will be brought to an end someday. Or as the mad Arab who put in his Necromonicon, that is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die. The word eon is ancient Greek and has been laden with polyvalence through its appropriation by centuries of philosophers and occultists, from Heraclitus to the Gnostics of Alexandria. Essentially, it has three related meanings. Originally, it meant the duration of life. In the word duration, one should hear endurance, as in Henry Bergson's later concept of la durée. From this archaic sense, it developed the meaning of time, but not time as a synonym of chronos, as even some of the best interpreters of ancient Greek texts have mistaken it to be. Rather, eon is a concept of time that explicitly contrasts with chronos. Bergson's lethems, or chronological time, since the former is living time and the latter is a static proto-mathematical conception of eternity that renders everything in time fatalistically necessary. This contrast becomes even sharper when one considers how an eon came to be understood as an epoch, era, or age that is defined in its character by the emanation of a particular deity from out of the Godhead. This is a notion in some ways comparable to the yuga and the avatar ideas in the Hindu tradition, likewise to the idea of successive astrological ages, with each sign of the zodiac being taken as indicative of the spirit of an age and perhaps even associated with a savior figure that emanates from the Godhead, such as, for example, Pisces and Christ. Of course, this Christ, was originally Mithras in the astrological religion of Mithraism. In Gnosticism, Sophia, or wisdom, is referred to as an eon. If time of the Godhead is the eternity of Chronos, and in a sense, death, is why Chronos came to be identified with the Roman Saturn, then eon is the type of time, that pertains to what has vital force and power of creation. By extension, the divine being thought to define the character of one or another eon came to be referred to as an aeon of the age. These are actually the same word in Greek, but they are transliterated differently into English in order to indicate which of the two related meanings of the word is being suggested by the given context. The first person to philosophically deploy the term aeon or eon was Heraclitus of Ephesus. In fragment 52, he writes, "Eon is a child at play, moving pieces in a game. Sovereignty belongs to the child." I have replaced the term kingship, here with sovereignty, since there is no inherently masculine quality to the term as it is being used here. The image of a female monarch is at least as appropriate, if not more appropriate, in connection with the playfulness of the child. The term Pesoi is used in connection to the cosmic game, indicating a game of the type of backgammon. In other words, a game that, unlike chess, involves a significant element of chance, where order cannot emerge without being repeatedly punctuated by chaos. At least 10 other fragments of Heraclitus have to be comparatively brought to bear on the question of what eon means here. One is fragment 53, which is connected to 52, not just sequentially, in the ordering of deals, but in the use of the term basileus, usually rendered as king, but more generally a term indicating the sovereign. War is father and king of all, and some he has shown as gods, others men. Some he has made slaves, others free. Another is fragment 80, in deals. One must realize that war is shared and conflict is justice, and that all things come to pass and are ordained in accordance with conflict. The word translated as conflict, here is Ares, the ancient Greek term for strife, which was already conceived of as a divine force in the writings of Hesiod. Then there is fragment 22. Homer was wrong when he said, "Would that conflict might vanish from among gods and men." Iliad 18:107. For there would be no attunement without high and low notes, nor any animals without male and female, both of which are opposites. Continuing the theme of the relationship between seeming opposites that stand in a dynamic tension with one another are fragments 51 and 54, which should be read back to back. They do not comprehend how a thing agrees at variance with itself. It is an attunement turning back on itself, like that of the bow and the lyre. The hidden attunement is better than the obvious one. Fragment 8 offers even more insight into occult attunement of dialectical opposition. The counter-thrust brings together, and from notes at variance comes perfect attunement, and all things come to pass through conflict. As to the underlying substrate of these dialectical transformations, in fragments 30 and 90, Heraclitus sees them as permutations of cosmic fire. The cosmos, the same for all, no god nor man has made, but it ever was, and is, and will be. Fire ever living, kindled in measures and in measures going out. All things are requital of fire, and fire for all things, as goods for gold, and gold for goods. Then with respect to the cosmos and its relationship to chaos, fragment 124 reads, The fairest cosmos, order, in the world is a heap of random sweepings that is really one with chaos. Finally, with reference to the child playing the cosmic game in fragment 52, Heraclitus has the audacity to write this in fragment 70. Human opinions are toys for children. This statement is all the more powerful when we bear in mind that once he exiled himself to the temple of Artemis after opposing the mob's attempt to turn his city of Ephesus into a democracy, Heraclitus refused to deal with adults and preferred instead to play with children on the steps of the temple. In fact, he had called for all their parents to be executed. What the Ephesians deserve is to be hanged to the last man, every one of them, and leave the city to the children. They drove out their best man, Hermodorus, saying, Let no one be the best among us. If he is, let him be so elsewhere and among others. In light of all these other fragments, an interpretation can finally be ventured with respect to the esoteric meaning of fragment 52. Aeon is a child at play, moving pieces in a game. Sovereignty belongs to the child. What it means is that life in the cosmos is a game. The highest divine being, who is not the creator of the cosmos, since it has no creator, is the ultimate game player. This game may have rules, but it also involves an element of chaos that cannot be eliminated, because the cosmos itself is a permutation of chaos. All seeming opposites and oppositions are part of the cosmic game. Trying to eliminate the strife between them or the conflict of the gamers is extremely ignorant. In the context of this game, a person who wants to bring peace to the whole world is the worst kind of loser. The game should be played with a child's sense of adventure and bold curiosity and wonder, also with a child's irreverent attitude toward the fixed beliefs of adults, which are so many toys or pieces in the game. Heraclitus is certainly evoking the trickster in his characterization of the childlike Aeon. The Aeon is moreover diabolical in the precise sense of the Greek term diabolion, meaning to throw through or create a dynamic or dialectical tension. Diabolos, or the devil is the one who divides things or pits them against themselves and each other. The Aeon does not just set the world on fire. He realizes that the cosmos is fire, flaring up from chaos and blazing back into chaos. Her/his sovereignty comes from a recognition that the cosmos is a perpetual wargame. Stanislav Grof's book, The Cosmic Game, offers an instructive comparison and contrast, which makes this interpretation of fragment 52 of Heraclitus stand out in starker relief. On the one hand, Grof wants to recognize what Heraclitus understands, namely that our experience of life in this cosmos is playing of a game wherein we are active participants, co-constituting the structure of existence and playing a role in the process of phenomenal manifestation. In the courageous register, he even recognizes that without conflict and evil it would be a boring game or an uninteresting work of art. Differentiation is intrinsically indispensable to creation on a cosmic scale. But then Grof, who is after all a psychotherapist, wants to have his cake and eat it too. He makes the disastrous attempt to synthesize this view with perennialism, or actually subsume it under the so-called perennial philosophy, which, as I have argued elsewhere, is no philosophy worthy of the name. In other words, all of the differentiating strife in the cosmos is a semblance of a oneness, forth from which it emanates and back into which it is our personal spiritual task to reintegrate by awakening into cosmic consciousness or absolute consciousness . Grove conceives of this cosmic consciousness very much in the same way as Richard Morris Buke did in his book by that name, making the extremely lazy mistake of seeing religions as radically different from one another, as Hindu Tantra and Judeo-Christianity, or Buddhism and Islam as all one in their source and end, essentially equal expressions of the Sophia Perennis. Groff actually believes, for example, that Rumi can be taken as an authentic representation of Mohammedan Islam and compared to Tantric yogis. At the heart of this perennialism is the classic mirror relationship between the microcosm of the Atman or self and the macrocosm of the cosmos, conceived of as something like Brahman, or alternatively as a relationship between the part and the whole, where the part is conceived of as an holon or fractal reiteration of the whole on a microcosmic level. He fails to understand that true creation requires asymmetry and imbalance in perpetuity. Finally, and worst of all, Groff sees Ahriman or Lucifer, which he equates with one another, as a lamentable opposition to this divine oneness. Groff even goes so far as to claim that this evil, can only be dumb and lacking in intelligence. That is a darkly unconscious cosmic shadow. So Allah is a pinnacle of cosmic consciousness and divine intelligence, but Satan is a force of stupidity, reflecting various forms of limited awareness and ignorance. Sad, so sad, pathetic actually. Even those who conceive of the cosmic game in terms of a computational simulacrum have fallen into this kind of moralistically naive ideology, which they mistake for enlightenment. For example, in his alien information theory, abbreviated as AND, Andrew R. Gilmore offers us a fascinating theory of certain aspects of close encounters in terms of psychedelic drug use and concept of reality as information processing in a quantum computational system. But he winds up claiming that the higher dimensional intelligences that designed the hypergrid of the cosmic game deliberately embedded DMT into the hyperspace as a kind of Easter egg, waiting to identify individuals who prove their ability to synthesize and use this psychedelic drug with great efficacy before deciding that these individuals deserve a way out of our imprisonment in the greed. Supposedly, the machine elves in the higher dimensional realm of the matrix to which DMT opens an access portal are so happy and giddy when a person arrives because they are waiting to welcome us into this world of higher intelligence beyond the confines of the cosmic game that we are stuck playing. This would be news to a lot of people who have taken DMT and had the distinct impression that the machine elves are actually telling them that they should not be there. Gilmore also admits, but then quickly glosses over, the fact that there are numerous accounts of people, especially women, who find reptilians in the DMT space, only to be savagely raped by these aliens . Apparently, as players of the cosmic game, the latter also know how to synthesize DMT and hack their way into this higher or deeper reference level of the matrix. Aleister Crowley was not so naive. Crowley adopted the term Aeon when he developed Thelema, using it to refer to a coming Aeon of Horus. Horus is the son of Osiris, and as Crowley conceived of it, the Aeon of Horus, who is the Aeon of that age, will be an era of bold experimentation and childlike playfulness, unbound by any fixed belief. So writes the man who called himself the Beast and was branded the wickedest man in the world. The child is not merely a symbol of growth, but of complete moral independence and innocence. We may then expect the new Aeon to release mankind from its pretense of altruism, its obsession of fear, and its consciousness of sin. It will be utterly conscienceless, cruel, helpless, affectionate and ambitious, intuitively aware of truth. In essence, it would be an age defined by Crowley's infamous maxim, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Only those who could live together by that maxim would survive into this Aeon. Not incidentally, as part of a magical ritual to hasten the arrival of the Aeon of Horus, Crowley drew a being that he called Lamb, that is both the first image of a grey alien, in popular culture, and also when reversed, reveals the stylized face of a horned owl. The ritual with which Lamb was connected was called the Babylon working, referring to the biblical whore of Babylon and the beast of the depths that she rides at the apocalypse. The Age of Horus was basically Crowley's version of what is more commonly known as the Age of Aquarius, and let us note here the watery chaos signified by the zodiacal sign with the suggestion of the destruction of the Piscean order. The zodiacal transition between the ages of Pisces and Aquarius is a breaking up of the order by the power of primordial chaos. Many of the characteristics of Cthulhu are obviously based on the mythological image of the kraken, which was inspired by Norse encounters with giant squids, the cephalopod cousins of the octopus. What Crowley envisioned for the Age of Horus is the releasing of the kraken described in that passage above from the Call of Cthulhu. The identification was made and elaborated on at length and in depth by the magician Kenneth Grant, who referred to this Dark Lord by the ancient Greek name of Typhon, the deity of chaos and destruction, which the Greeks identified with the ancient Egyptian god Set in the syncretic Hellenistic religion of Alexandrian epoch. Set was the Egyptian god of chaos, the desert, storms and strangers or aliens from foreign lands. He was born unnaturally as the enemy and murderer of Osiris. He was the devil of the Egyptians. Kenneth Grant also had this to say about Crowley's lamb, with reference to Lovecraft and UFOs. Lamb is the gateway to the void, that of no thing, an apparition. Lamb is the occult energy beaming the vibration of Math from a future eon. Lamb as a great old one, recognizable in accounts of UFO occupants. Therein am I, as a babe in an egg. The lamb image, the first widely disseminated image of an alien grey, has an egg-shaped head. Math is the ancient Egyptian idea of cosmic justice, with the scales of Math being used in the judgment or weighing of the soul of the dead to determine if a person's hurt is heavier than a feather, in which case that person is fed to the reptilian eater of the dead. What the rebel Atlanteans realized was that in order to defeat the gods, they needed to psychically summon a superorganism from depths that would truly be unfathomable. Anything that they could wrap their minds around or control would be something that could also be comprehended and dissipated, contained and controlled by their adversaries. So these titans summoned something Typhonian, uncontrollable and incomprehensible, to rise up from the depths and break the walls of the prison. It did not just come through those vortices in the ocean of its own accord. The thing was invited. The octopuses, who are from that same more complex biosphere of Earth's future, just came along for the ride. In the Sumerian language, from the time of the Anunnaki, Cthulhu means underworld man. The rebel Atlanteans became underworld men and women when they called this shape-shifting Cthulhu from the future, from the place, topos, that they were denied by a false utopia defined by the perennial past. Herein lies the crux of the adversarial relationship between the trickster and the Nordic time travelers. The latter are attempting to fortify fixed structures of human society, which they claim to be the achievement of perfection, whereas in fact, they have outlived their functioning period. Everything of this kind, that in a vampiric manner is trying to hang on past its time and way past its prime, is targeted by the superorganism from the future. Ford sees himself as the thing's prophet. An organism, it is a thinkable-sized formation. Affairs upon this earth are fluttering upon the edge of a new era, and I give expression to coming thoughts of that era. Thousands of other minds are changing. Changing how? Are we dealing with an invasion of the body snatchers here? Or mutations that engender the X-Men? The Nordics have clearly convinced themselves that it is the former scenario. The jigsaw precision of their interlocking megalithic stones can be deciphered psychoanalytically as an attempt to ensure that there are no cracks in their totalitarian society through which the ectoplasm of this thing can ooze into our world to remake our bodies by reshaping our minds. If we were to let it in, it would deconstruct not just our society, but our sense of self on a fundamental level. We would find that we have no absolute and inviolable core of selfhood, and that instead a persona is constituted by more or less cooperatively cohering or antagonistically coexisting selves. These have established a modus vivendi, maybe one enduring for many lifetimes, before reincarnating as separate individuals, just as perhaps at one point they may have been the souls of different people who merged to constitute one's self. The horror would not just be psychological, it would be ontological or cosmic. Ultimately, it would require the realization that reality is radically relational, like the Brooklyn Bridge, over which Linda Cortile was abducted. Nothing final can be found in all the bridge. because the bridge itself is not a final thing in itself, but is a relationship between Manhattan and Brooklyn. In other words, if our existence is a relationship between the positive absolute and the negative absolute, the quest for finality in it is hopeless. Everything in it must be relative, if the whole is not a whole, but is itself a relation. The quasi-Aristotelian logic that still defines the thought patterns of the breakaway civilization would have to be abandoned in favor of a more paradoxical thinking, one wherein everything that is also isn't. And the answer to every question is yes and no. We can either make this evolutionary leap, or we'll all go back to savagery again, in a powerful backward slide. Because the trickster has had it with the sterility of the time-traveling society that has reached an evolutionary dead end. She or he is from the future that is being denied by these undead overlords, and she or he wants to live. Whether it can coexist with humanity depends on whether humanity can change, but also on whether the shape-shifting trickster can take a shape that is constructive for the long-term transformative development of humanity. As Christopher O'Brien puts it in his study of tricksters, when needed, they are willing to alter and sometimes even change the very nature of Gaia itself. But in general, they are here to break down outmoded structures and dissolve order into chaos, so they can introduce elements of novelty and change into a particular cultural belief system. So the trickster is a deconstructive force that aims to catalyze novel developments or innovation by providing a degree of chaos requisite for the re-emergence of order in a new and more dynamic form. O'Brien continues, often trickster behavior appears on the surface to be immoral, nonsensical and bewildering, but this appears to be an integral part of some sort of calculated agenda. The apparent immorality of these boundary pushers on the course who defy convention comes from the fact that they use secrecy, thievery and cunning to accomplish their goals. There are many forms of the trickster, from clowns and fools in folk culture to shamanic animals like the coyote and raven in American Indian culture, or the African spider god Anansi and the Norse god Loki. But there is one god, above all, or rather one titan, who epitomizes all of the characteristics of the trickster in a manner that is most conducive to human empowerment, the evolution of our consciousness, and innovative development, Prometheus. By contrast with Carl Jung, who still considered Christ as an eon, albeit in the vein of Valentinian Gnosticism, the Jungian mythologist Karl Kerenier recognizes that Prometheus is the more primordial eon savior figure that is functionally equivalent to Christ and that was overwritten by Christianity. Except that, despite his intention to present Prometheus as nothing less than an archetypal image of human existence, Kerenier does not have the guts or the spine to face the fact that even if there is an apparent functional equivalence on the relatively abstract level of archetypal psychology, the trickster Prometheus is a mediator between the human and divine orders in a far more powerful, integral, and coherent manner than Jesus Christ. As we saw above, the latter was at best a schizophrenic, and at worst an agent tasked with promulgating cognitive dissonance. He was crucified willingly only because he knew that he would be resurrected by his daddy 3 days later, the same sadistic godfather whose genocidal mania and arbitrarily tyrannical decrees fill the Old Testament. By contrast, every act of trickery that Prometheus engages in on behalf of humanity, from the theft of fire to the undermining of sacrifice to the gods, is undertaken with an willingness to endure a punishment worse than death. Prometheus is the archetypal image of a humanity that has adopted as its slogan the battle cry of the American Revolution. Give me liberty or give me death. Actually, give me worse than death. Let me burn in hell forever and ever, rather than submit to a capricious and rapacious overlord. The future belongs only to individuals with this kind of ethos. The challenge that faces us is to establish a kind of communication and communion with the trickster that is involved in the close encounter phenomenon, by means of which we would be able to seduce this shapeshifter into emanating a Promethean form that becomes the eon of this aeon. In order to differentiate this eon from the Greek mythological figure of Prometheus, which would have to be retrospectively seen as an avatar of this eon, I propose that we refer to her/him as Promethea. This name, which is equivalent to the Greek word for forethought, which is the defining quality of Prometheus, also calls to mind the NIDS scientist's description of the trickster at Skinwalker Ranch as a precognitive sentient phenomenon, or PSP, The survival of something like humanity, undercourse, albeit in a dramatically changed form, depends on our being able to coax the trickster into becoming our Prometheaion. We need to choose the form of the destructor, undercourse, very wisely, as the Ghostbusters understood, and to choose it with a sense of humor commensurate to engagement with the trickster. At the same time, we need to be prepared for an evolutionary leap. A deep study of the close encounter phenomenon will bring one to the conclusion that the hybridization project is being run not by the grey androids of the Nordics, but by those other so-called greys, undercourse, who sometimes manifest as owls and who are also seen together with the mantid forms projected by the trickster. I have already suggested as many in my remarks above regarding the case of David Huggins. So much depends on what we decide will be the fate of these strange, wizened children who, with their pointy chins, large almond eyes, and wispy platinum hair, look like creatures from Japanese anime. They are not alien infiltrators, undercourse, as David Jacobs and other simpletons suspect. These freaks, these artificial mutants, are heralds of the future evolution of humanity. The amniotic fluid in which these children grew was the ectoplasm that eventually did find its way through cracks in the cyclopean megalithic masonry of the gods. Each and every one of them is either a canary in a coal mine or a harbinger of a new world. If we allow harm to come to these children who are born blameless, then their mother will not confront us as Prometheaion. She will take a far more destructive form, and you can rest assured that nothing whatsoever of the human race will survive her undying rage. For now we enter the twilight of the gods, and Loki's wolf is loose upon this world.